Hello and welcome to the People, Place and Nature podcast. Did you know that concrete can actually be used to store CO2 and you can even sell credits for that process? And even it can make that concrete stronger and cure more quickly? Well, no, neither did I. But this is something that we're going to discuss in this episode with Chris Griffiths, Head of Product Sustainability for one of our fantastic sponsors, Marshalls. In this episode, we talk about sustainable manufacturing, the challenges and opportunities there are when it comes to creating products more sustainably, and the reality of this side of things as, we need these products for society, but we need to find a way to make sure that they're created in a responsible way and can have as minimal impact on the environment as possible. So this is a really interesting episode and I hope you enjoy it.
It's important to remember that sustainability doesn't just relate to the environment, it relates to your finances as well. That's why we switched to Beans accountants. Beans operate on a package system, so you always know where you stand. We halved our accountancy costs when we moved to them, and one of our associates moved to them as well and reduced theirs by 2/3. With free tax advice, accountancy support, and everything else they offer, you can't go wrong. So make sure you check out Beans Accountants in the description below, and I really hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi Chris, thanks so much for joining us today. Really interested in discussing a bit more about product sustainability and the actual realities of how we can make businesses more sustainable and the challenges that we are kind of faced when we come to do that.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's something that we're really passionate about as a business. It's something that's been core to our strategy for more than 20 years, and we've learnt a lot on the way. There's no doubt that we've been down a few rabbit holes, and we've backed a few wrong horses along the way. But that's inevitable when you're pushing things, you're pushing boundaries, and you're trying to pioneer in a space. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done. So we're happy to share it.
Brilliant. So you're obviously from Marshalls. So Marshalls are very kind enough to sponsor us. And one of the reasons we were so happy to have you guys as a sponsor is we know about the environmental work you're doing. Looking at how we can actually take products that we absolutely need. When we talk about the climate, we talk about no concrete, we talk about all of these kind of things. But actually, the reality is we need cities, we need pavements, we need all of these things. They're products that are inevitable. But the question is, how do you make them sustainable? It's not getting rid of them necessarily, it's looking at how we can actually embed sustainability and deliver things in a way that we can do as sensitively as possible, really.
And that's exactly where I position it. I think we're the pragmatic compromise. It would be lovely to think we have wonderful green spaces everywhere, and we let all the natural elements flourish, and we have grass everywhere, but we all drive cars, we have bikes. We're trying to encourage people to walk more. We need robust infrastructure. Concrete has been one of the materials that's been used for aeons very effectively. The challenge, as far as we're concerned, is how to bring more nature-based solutions into the kind of schemes that we supply to, but also how to make concrete more sustainably. And that's those are the sort of two areas I think that we, as a business, we've always strived to bring our to minimize our impact. But in the schemes that we provide to, what we want to do is make it easy for our customers, for our specifiers to integrate the kind of features that are going to help fight the climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also understanding how some of these things are used, because concrete is a really interesting example, because obviously it's one of the flagship things that we need to try and reduce the use of or change significantly. But actually it can still have real important applications that can be more sustainable than alternative options. So for example, we do a lot of work with one of our partners, Davies White, on play projects, and they very often use concrete footpaths to wind through the scheme. Now, a lot of people say, well, you're trying to be sustainable, all the structures are wood, the materials for most of the floor is sort of sand or wood chip, which is playable, adds more value to children. But actually, you've got to have something strong and robust. And one of the strongest and most robust things to sort of form the spine of these play features people can move through with pushchairs and all these kind of things is concrete. So actually, whilst it can be a very polluting product, if you look at the life cycle of it, it can actually work out much better, and that's often what's missed.
A couple of things to pick up on that, because I'd absolutely agree with your last point, is that I get asked about 3 questions on a virtually daily basis, and one of those is, what are your sustainable products? And I always say, well, it could be how it's made. So it could be, you could be looking at a material that's made at a works that's, a zero emissions works, or it could be what it's made out of. So what's the carbon footprint of that product? But it could also be what it actually does. And I think that's a really important element to look at. And an example that I always cite is rock wool insulation, because that's something that it's rocks that have been superheated and stretched, so they're incredibly energy intensive in that first sort of in that cradle to gate period of its manufacture. So if you just looked at that element, you'd never touch it. But if you consider what it does over its lifetime, all the heat energy that it holds onto, so looking at its full life cycle impact, it's a truly sustainable product. Are there better available? Yeah, there probably are. Ideally, you'd want something that doesn't have that high carbon load right at the start. But until we find that, rock wool's still a reasonable, sensible product to use. The other point that I want to pick up on is the idea that concrete is you said polluting. It's concrete in itself doesn't have to be bad for the environment. The issue with concrete is that it's got a lot of cement in it, and cement is incredibly carbon intensive in its manufacture. So there are various things that we can do, various things that we are doing and have been working on for a long time to reduce the footprint of our carbon product. To reduce the footprint of our concrete product. The first is to reduce the amount of cement that goes into them. So that's something that we've been underway with for a long time. We've with our concrete blocks, for example, we've reduced the cement content by 40%, a minimum of 40%. In some of our works, depending on the materials available, we've reduced it by up to 60%. So that has a massive impact on the carbon footprint of the products. And you can only do that by finding consistent sources of alternative materials. By working with sort of admixtures, working with the mix design to come up with something that's still structurally robust, still gives people the aesthetic they want, but it does away with the carbon intensive element of the mix. So that's something that we've been doing for a long time. The real sort of exciting piece is all about carbon sequestration. And this is it's long been known that concrete absorbs carbon over its lifetime. And all the science tells us that process starts, it absorbs a lot of concrete at the start, it absorbs a lot of carbon at the start, and then over its lifetime, it'll reduce. But it continues to reabsorb carbon throughout its lifetime. And that carbon's permanently locked in through a catalytic process. We can exploit that by collecting excess carbon. I'm going to make this sound simple, and it's really not. But we can collect excess carbon from a different process, and we can either force it into the mix when we're mixing the concrete right at the start, or alternatively we can inject it as a gas into the curing chamber at the end of the manufacturing process. And the advantage for us is that the concrete achieves strength much quicker, so that we can, anything we can do to reduce our cycle time is good for our business, because that means we can get it into our customers' hands quicker. It's not sitting around in our yards. Obviously, it's stopping carbon escaping into the atmosphere. That's permanently locked away. Even when the concrete gets crushed at the end of its life, it's not going to be released. So we can absolutely demonstrate how much carbon has been sequestered in the block. It's a very defendable science. And finally, that's great, because that means, from our point of view, from a business point of view, we can charge carbon credits for that, or we can charge other businesses for carbon credits, and they can use that as a platinum level carbon offset. Because we've done a lot in this space over the past 20 years, and we've achieved everything we've achieved without offsetting, because we know that a lot of carbon offset programs at the moment are riddled with problems.
Yeah, definitely they are. Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't realise it was injected into the process.
That's the first one that we're the first company in the UK to do this at scale at one of our works using carbon cure technology. And that's, we're only just dipping our toe in the water. And it's a very sort of early stage of the process, early stage of the learning process. So it has a fairly minimal effect on the carbon footprint of the actual block itself, but it removes 30 tons of carbon from that works over a year. So, you know, if you consider that we've got, I think 20 manufacturing plants, once we upscale that technology and put that technology into all the works across our network, that's going to make a significant dent on our Scope 3 emissions. And we're also pushing the boundaries because we've got the kit installed. We can now start introducing more of it. We can start sort of pushing that. And the ideal, of course, is to take the excess carbon from the cement manufacturers. So we've got a nice sort of closed loop story. Because for all the good work that we're doing in this space, and we know plenty of our peers are doing it as well, and we're all sharing ideas because there's a lot of motivated people in this sector who really want to make a difference. But because we're working with our partners, we know that the cement suppliers are all really motivated. They've got their net zero targets as well. So I think that's what keeps me optimistic, because when you work in this space, it can be fairly depressing, can't it? When you're looking through, it can be. The outlook can be fairly bleak sometimes. But you look at the work that we're doing, that the wider industry is doing, and we've got the best opportunity out of any other industry in the world, really, to make such a massive difference. And it's only going to happen from investing in it, understanding it, and trialing it. Taking the risks. And that's. We've been doing it for a long time, but it's accelerated no end in the last sort of 2-3 years, really.
Oh, I bet it has. It's interesting to hear some of that, because for me, whenever I think of products becoming more sustainable, I immediately just think of, right, okay, energy. How do it's more about sort of reducing the energy used to create those products. Because to me, as you can tell, I don't know a great deal about the process, but I always just think, well, cement. There's not really that much you can kind of do with it, because that's what it is. So it's interesting to find out how you guys are sort of tackling that problem, and the fact that you can actually put the carbon directly into it. And I had heard of a couple of projects where, I have heard of concrete absorbing carbon over time, but I never really understood how much of a difference it would actually make in sort of the grand scheme of things. And quite often it's covered when you put it in buildings or whatever anyway. So how much impact does that have? So being able to deal with it initially is really valuable. But also there's kind of a question there around how do you actually make things like cement more sustainable in and of itself. So it's great that obviously reducing it is the first step. That's obviously an immediate saving, reducing the content. But do you know much about how some of those cement suppliers are sort of trying to get the product down to net zero? Are they sort of trying to catalyse it in different ways? Or?
I don't know.
No, that's okay. No, it's just something I don't. Well, I mean, I know nothing about it, so just interested to see.
Our materials guys talk to cement suppliers all the time, and they work very closely with them. We work on projects together because we're one of the biggest, one of their biggest customers. But our materials guys will be best placed to talk about what they're doing in different sectors, I guess. One of the things that we look at is dispensing with cement altogether, and we've just completed our first full-scale production trial of cement-free concrete blocks.
Okay.
So that's going to reduce the carbon footprint of the product really quite significantly. The issue is always what you replace it with. It's got to be. You've got to have a consistent source of it. You've got to investigate what the carbon load of the alternative product is as well, because people sort of fetishize cement-free concrete, but some of the alternatives aren't that good either. It's really important to investigate the alternatives, investigate the solutions, but you need to take risks as well. And the other consequence, inevitably, unfortunately, is price. Because the alternative materials are frequently a lot more expensive. And we will absorb as much of that cost as we can, but the R&D costs money, it takes time, it uses an awful lot of resource. So we've always taken the stance that we don't want to have a green range because that by inference suggests that we've got a range that's not. And we've always applied our sustainability model across the business. So all the work that we've done at an operational level to drive carbon out of our operation, we've reduced our carbon footprint by 50% across the business between 2008 and 2020. It doesn't happen by accident. So that affects all of the products that we make, and we're proud of that. But we're emerging into a space where it's kind of giving people the opportunity to put their money where their mouth is. People have been asking us for cement-free, for low-carbon products. We're making them. But, is the market ready to pay for them?
Indeed. I mean, it's the green premium, isn't it? And you see it with so many things. But I mean, as people invest in it more, as we research it more, as it becomes the standard, that of course those things will come down. But that's part of the challenge of the time we're in, is that actually we are in this transitional period where all those things are emerging. And that's one of the things I think people sort of forget, is that actually, whilst we do have a lot of fixes, and there are a lot of quick fixes, some of these more significant things when it comes to actually products and industry, it's not an overnight change. It's an investment in R&D and new materials and research and all these things as well. That was all different ways of saying R&D now, wasn't it? But all new R&D, all new products, materials, accessibility to supply chains as well. All of these things have to change. But then the knock-on price can be really significant. And I have seen some green products where I've looked at it and thought, well, no one's going to pay for that. And just a throwaway example was sort of solar roads. Great concept, but when I looked at the economics of it, it absolutely makes no sense. It's completely unviable. So it was at the time. Maybe it's changed. That's the thing. Great idea. Keep looking at it, but at the moment, not viable.
And that's a lot of these technologies that we're sort of launching and trialing now are things that we tried 6, 7, 8 years ago, and there was just not the business case, and that's the sad reality. As a purist, I used to get really frustrated and go, well, why? Who cares when the market is interested or not? But to be a truly sustainable business, for a truly sustainable society, you've got to balance the economic with the environmental, with the social. Not one of those things. And I think the pandemic probably brought home how important the economic side of the ESG circle is, because without that, you can't do the R&D, you can't do, society doesn't function. So I'm really sort of pleased that we're now in a place where our customers are happy to sort of work with us on these solutions, and they're actually pushing us, and they're pushing an open door, because we've got all we have to do is look through the file, blow the dust off the files, and we've got so many solutions that were trialed, that we're ready to present, that now we can actually take to an engaged and interested market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on ESG, and I think that's something we definitely need to talk about, and I think we'll come back to that in a moment. But I'd be interested to find out a bit more about other things that you guys are doing in terms of sustainability within the business, because obviously there's the product side, which is the main part of the business, but we've talked about cement, but obviously there's things like kilns and all this kind of stuff as well that are needed to sort of cure the product, and also within other parts of the business too.
We don't need kilns to cure concrete.
You don't?
That's one of the big differences between clay products and concrete products, because concrete cures naturally through just an exothermic process. Sometimes, depending on climatic conditions, in the winter, or when it's very cold or when it's very humid, we might use some heat to speed that process up. Yeah. But other than that, no, there's very little energy involved in concrete production.
Interesting.
But the most of the carbon comes from the cement content. So that's how, if we can drive cement out of it, then all of a sudden we turn from being a relatively dirty business to being a very clean one.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'd assumed there was some heat energy used in the process to accelerate it, but I didn't realise it was so little. Interesting.
We use some heat in, well, one of the interesting stories, and there's all sorts of little anecdotes I could tell you about the little things that we've done to, to help reduce our impact. But packaging for a long time, people now ask us for zero packaging. They want to get rid of all the plastic packaging for all the right reasons. And it's in our interest to do that as well, because it costs us money.
Yeah.
And it also costs us money because the way you would have wrapped a pack of products 10 years ago, it comes through on the conveyor, a robot puts a bag over the top, and then it goes through a heat oven, so the bag shrinks onto the... So all of that process is really... if we can get rid of that, that saves us money on the plastic, saves money on the heating. The customer doesn't have to get rid of it at the end of when they're on site. So it's a win-win. The issue is that with some products, so we've driven the packaging off as much as we can in as many different product ranges and at as many sites as we can, but you still need an element in some product ranges for health and safety reasons. You don't want heavy concrete stuff shaking around in the back of the van. So we've minimised it as much as we can. So we've perhaps got rid of concrete bags and moved to plastic bands. But a lot of this work is understanding what the unintended consequences are. So if we remove the bags, brilliant, we've solved that problem. But then what might happen is you get a pallet of flags, or you get a pallet of blocks on site, and because they've been exposed to the weather, they're not in the right condition. So they get sent back, and then while they're being sent back, they'll probably get crushed and reused as aggregate. So what's the carbon load of all that? Whereas if we'd have put a small, a minimised plastic cover on the top, the customer gets the product in a usable condition. So so many of these things are a balance, and so many of these things depend on what lens you're looking through. And this is one of the frustrations in the space at the moment, I think. To cite another one, we've had our focus on carbon for a long time. We started working with the Carbon Trust in 2008, before it was fashionable. And we worked with them to road test the methodology that's now in PAS 2050. Because the Carbon Trust are the experts, right? They're the people who literally wrote the book. So we've been working them to understand our impact and to help to reduce it ever since. So that's been our focus. We're also asked, though, equally, when we share our carbon footprint data, people say, okay, but what products have got recycled content in, for example? We use recycled content whenever we can, but we use recycled content where it's appropriate, but more often than not, that drives the carbon footprint up. Because effectively, if you're collecting a previously used material and then transporting it to a site to be crushed, and then you're putting that back into the material, that carries a heavier carbon load than just using a locally sourced virgin aggregate. So the issue is, what's more important? Is it circularity or is it carbon? Because it makes absolute sense to me to reuse stuff, reuse resources. But that currently isn't the thing that's being targeted. The focus is very much on carbon for all the right reasons, probably. So what do you want? People say recycled content, carbon. You can have one or the other, but you're unlikely to have both.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. We talked about this previously around sort of the recycled content issue, because it's a really challenging one to try and actually come up with a solution. And when we were having this conversation, we talked about the other environmental things as well, around sort of water use and all of this. And what do you kind of rank as the most important is a really big challenge. Because to me as well, I think recycled content, absolutely, that's what we should be doing. We should be reusing whatever we have that's a waste product. But if the carbon cost of that is higher, you then have the question of, well, is it worth it? Should we be recycling it? Actually, it'd be better to just, stick it in a landfill or whatever. But obviously that's not ideal either. And that's where I think sometimes like the lifetime cost of these things could be more helpful. I don't know if that's something that's looked at for recycled content. What would be the cost of disposing it and everything else, or does it still not?
Less about the cost, but certainly when it comes to carbon calculations, and this is something that we're preoccupied, the industry is very sort of preoccupied with at the moment. I mentioned earlier talking about sort of life cycle, whole life cycle analysis in terms of carbon. So, don't just look at the cradle to gate element, the emissions that are in material extraction and in manufacturing and packaging, but then look at what good it does during its lifetime. That's the right approach, and that's vindicated by the Competition and Market Authority's Green Claims Code that was launched earlier this year. They say that one of their 6 bullet points, one of their sort of tenets in their manifesto, if you like, is that any claims you make about a product should consider its full life cycle, not just one element of it. That's right, surely. But that is open then to people being rather optimistic or disingenuous about what happens to something at the end of its life. Yeah, I might like to think that our products are sort of lifted manually and then reused in their original form, because that would be great for the carbon footprint if it just becomes a permanently reused product. And we've seen examples of EPD documents, environmental product declarations, where clay pavers, Dutch clay pavers, claim that their pavers are lifted at the end of life and then reused again as clay pavers. I can't say that doesn't happen, but it seems unlikely to me. I suspect that as often as not, they're going to get crushed and used as landfill. And because we don't know what's going to happen to something at the end of its life, I think it's probably not very sensible to make that claim within your within the carbon footprint that you're claiming. But that's the world that we're in at the moment. Nobody really knows what the carbon impact of a whole life cycle is. And there are a lot of assumptions to make and a lot of estimates to be made based on best knowledge, and people are genuinely being really quite sensible about it. But even so, it's open to greenwash.
That indeed, and this is where some of the economic issues come in. For example, depending how it's laid, if you've got pavers that could be used again, the cost of salvaging them, having a guy there chipping bits of cement off or whatever to use them again can be really expensive. So are people actually going to do that? And as you say, it's more likely in a lot of cases that they'll just come in and bulldoze it, crush it, use it as an aggregate somewhere else. I mean, there was a company I met a little while ago, really interesting company doing lots of sustainable carpets.
Yes.
And they do a lot where their offer is basically to come in, if you're retrofitting a shop or whatever, they'll take away the old carpet, whoever it's from, and part of their fee and everything is sort of processing and recycling all of that. And that's part of their sort of offer on sustainability. And I thought that's fantastic. But how often does that happen? Okay, it might be great if you've got an office block that's just doing a bit of regeneration, but there's going to be a huge amount of projects where someone's come in to clear the site, they've ripped everything out and just got rid of it, and then you're coming in later to actually fit something new. So, and absolutely they're doing the right thing. That's what they should be doing. It's a fantastic idea. It's a fantastic thing to do, and I think it's great. However, there is this kind of issue where there's still such a big separation of where services come in, and that's the problem really, is how do we make sure that things are actually recycled properly when it's a demolition company coming in. And obviously that's part of their job to do that, but when it's an old carpet as an example, or pavers, when there's such a big cost potentially associated with dealing with that properly, how often does it actually get properly resolved?
It's interesting that ideas that floated across the desk sort of 7-8 years ago and got laughed out of the room are suddenly coming back around again. But this idea, because we're a manufacturer, we manufacture products and we sell them to customers, and that's usually where our sort of involvement ends. But we were kicking ideas around quite some time ago now, and the idea that people subscribe to rental, you rent most things, you rent your car effectively, you lease your car, you pay subscriptions to things. The idea that instead of buying a pavement office that then becomes yours and we have nothing to do with, the idea that perhaps we should look at becoming a rental model, so a local authority sort of pays a subscription service, and then we look after it, we maintain it, we lift it at the end of its useful life, and then we recycle it or replace it. It's really complicated, and it's as I say, it got laughed out of the room 6-7 years ago. But people rent jeans now. There's businesses where you pay a subscription, and when you've had enough of that pair of jeans, you send them back. So you never own them. They're just something.
So, I saw one for children's toys the other day, where instead of buying kids' toys every week, you get a new box of toys and you send the old one back, and it's industrially cleaned and sent to somebody else, and it's kind of keeps it fresh. And it's that kind of idea, isn't it?
And and the beauty is from a financial point of view. And there's, again, let's not be squeamish. There's nothing sort of unethical about making a profit. But from a financial point of view, that gives you a vision of what you're bringing in every month for however many years. So so that's why businesses like that kind of financial model. How we deliver on that, as we're not involved in installation, we're not involved in maintenance, we're not involved in end of life treatment. But should we be? And should we be partnering with other people? Those are the kind of conversations that we're sort of exploring and starting to have. And I think that's where, that'd be a really interesting place to go to.
Yeah, that is really interesting. It's not something I'd really considered, but it makes a huge amount of sense when you think of circularity. So it's where that circularity conversation comes back in. And also, because you're guaranteeing a suitable use for that product at the end of what would be the end of its life. And where we have products that are incredibly robust, like pavers, for example, they in theory, they could be used for a huge length of time, but they're not, as we regenerate areas and this kind of thing. So, but there's no reason why they couldn't be used elsewhere thereafter.
I think the idea, it probably applies to some product types more than others. We sell an awful lot of natural stone paving, and the idea that you might be able to buy, we've paved some of the most sort of prestigious locations all over the country with this stuff. So if you could pick up natural stone that had been that had paved Buckingham Palace or paved Trafalgar Square or something like that, that comes with a
that's true.
People buy bits of turf from their favourite football teams, or there was a nightclub in Halifax and they sold the carpet to make money. So we could start looking at that model as well, but that requires a massive change in the kind of business we are.
There's a timber company in London that deals purely with reclaimed timber from the docks and places like that.
Right.
And that's becoming something that's used on a lot of high-profile projects that we're involved with now, because they want that sort of story behind it. This has been dredged out the river, and we're reusing this really valuable timber that's really beautiful. I can't remember the name of the company now off the top of my head, but that's very, very, very interesting. And it's that kind of thing of actually going, right, okay, what happens with this thing that is otherwise at the end of its life? Or we're retrofitting this part of the dock. They're taking all the decking up, and then that decking is sort of repurposed, reinvigorated, and now is being used to make benches or a new deck somewhere else in an area that's not as intensive as it perhaps was, so it's suitable to be used there. And that's a better way of sort of, again, thinking of sort of the sustainability. I think it's been done with piers. There have been piers that have been lifted or demolished, and they've taken it from there, and they're now using it in sort of public realm projects. Because a lot of these products are very sustainable, where they've been by the sea or in water, so they're naturally very hardy, so they can keep being used. So it's a similar kind of situation to your products.
I think somebody explained that in, I can't remember the country now, but in some Scandinavian country, that when a building's being due for demolition, when a building's about to be demolished, they look at it as a kind of as a builder's merchant, and they'll say, well, we've got this much glass, we've got this much brick, we've got this much timber, we've got this. So they go around and do an inventory, and that has a value, a cachet. So we'd see it as something that needs to be disposed of. But if you flip your thinking, then it's like that becomes something that is a rich source of materials that you can then reuse. But again, it comes back to that cost time thing, because to dismantle
absolutely.
Is complicated, it's expensive. But I can't help thinking that that's the way the construction industry needs to go.
Well, it's how it used to be. It's how it used to be. I remember my grandparents, my granddad was a builder. He used to do a lot of demolition work, and they take all the wood out of the houses, and that was what would heat their house.
Yeah.
So that's what they used the timber for. I think most of it, the extensions on his house, were reclaimed brick from projects he did because he couldn't afford to buy it himself, and that was a bit more of the reality of the world in those days.
It was done out of necessity back then.
Absolutely.
But now we're recognising that actually there was a real value in that kind of approach. It changes. Is this because we're old? Or is this because I'm old? Are we going, the old ways are so much better? I think that...
well, it's need, isn't it? I think, back then there was a need because there was more of an economic need because people couldn't necessarily afford it and that things were less available. Now we've got everything at the end of our fingertips, but the need is coming from the impact that is having on the environment. So the need has perhaps changed, but there is still a requirement to actually look at these things in a more sensible manner, a less wasteful manner, I suppose.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's nothing's going to happen particularly quick in that space. I think. The real focus is on cleaning up operations and cleaning up carbon. That's very much where the focus is at the moment. Circularity absolutely should be on the agenda as well, and it's something that we talk about all the time. But again, it comes back to that conversation: what's going to carry the biggest carbon load? Because that feels like, I think we need some guidance though, and that's my frustration personally. Because I'm telling you, because that's my opinion. My opinion is that carbon is the overriding sort of issue. But if we were to have some central sort of body, if we were to have a government statement, imagine, that would say, it's more important to reuse materials, that's our focus, then that would help. That would save a lot of time. Because at the moment, everybody's trying to do everything. The sustainability space has exploded. I said that we've been on this journey for 20 years. And it was quite lonely for a lot of those years and it wasn't easy because, you've got to convince people to do stuff that's not particularly fashionable. But it takes some part. My old boss, Chris Harrop, he absolutely drove it into the business, drove it onto the agenda, and that wasn't easy for him. But on the other hand, whatever you choose, because there's nobody to challenge you, that's reasonable and that's right. That's the right thing to do. So we got good mileage out of doing the right things based on best knowledge at the time. We're now emerging into a space though where everybody's trying to do the right thing. Everybody's sort of working together, collaborating. We're all looking at each other, going, well, what's the right way forward? What's the best methodology to align to? What's the best strategy to adopt? And it's not clear anymore. It's not, we're finding our way towards that, and it's, it can be really frustrating. I think we need stronger legislation. We need better guidance. We need, it's not for lack of will. Because I talk to my peers in the sector. We're all doing great things, but people are kind of. Have you heard of green hushing? This is the latest. Greenwash was where people pretended to be very environmentally sound but weren't. Green hushing is the kind of the sort of pullback that's occurring at the moment, because maybe 18 months, 2-3 years ago, everybody was shouting, really proud of the achievements they make because they've done great things. But now, because there's very little in the way of understanding or guidance about where to go, we're kind of clamming up a bit because we're going, well, I don't want to stick my head over the battlements and say I've aligned myself to this, this particular methodology or this particular strategy, because if that turns out to be the wrong one, then so everybody's. It's not that people aren't working. I know what we're doing. I know what our peers are doing. The industry is probably more. Well, it's certainly busier in this space than it's ever been, and there's so much exciting work going on. But people are nervous to share it in case they. I always talk about, do you back the Betamax or do you back the VHS? You want to back the system, the method that is going to be the widely accepted one. And just to give you a story with that, I mentioned that we work with the Carbon Trust. The Carbon Trust are the experts when it comes to carbon. We've worked with them for years. The people there are, incredibly detailed, incredibly thorough, very knowledgeable. They're the people that we'd go to. We recognised, though, about 12 to 18 months ago, that that EPDs were becoming the sort of industry standard. The market was demanding these documents to understand the sustainable performance of a product. EPDs
Sorry, I was going to say, what is an EPD?
Sorry, environmental product declarations. And EPDs are great because they allow you to demonstrate quite clearly what modules of a product's footprint boundary you're quoting. So when you get 3 or 4 EPDs together, it's not dead simple because there's various little tricks that you need to understand. But broadly, you can make fair comparisons, fair apples for apples comparisons. So you can see, this element is cleaner, this element is, is higher in carbon. That's what customers want to get to.
And does that cover more of a range of things then than just carbon? So that's like water use, energy use,
absolutely,
that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's all sorts of things. At the moment, people are only interested in the carbon element, but you also get all of the other sort of environmental impacts of a product as well, which is really important. The issue that is sort of recognised across the industry is that, and I mentioned it earlier, a lot of the assumptions towards the end of life are open to people making their own assumptions. And that's not, that's where it doesn't provide you with a fair comparison. So we always use the Carbon Trust to provide our carbon footprints because they're the experts and because they made those assumptions for us based on their standard models. So that was something that we could stand behind. We weren't marking our own homework. We were using the external experts. Because the market's moved towards EPDs, we've had to do so as well. But that comes with all sorts of other issues as well. So this is, that was an example of, we use the Carbon Trust for all the right reasons. And we still work with them for all sorts of other things as well because they're the experts. But in terms of talking to customers, we now have to use EPDs, which certainly have their advantages, but again don't have that kind of that distance, that sort of independent sort of distance that I think should be there in any kind of reporting process. So that's a frustration I think at the moment. But we're in a really fast-moving space. We're in a fast-evolving space. You look at IT departments in every business will change the system that they use every 12 months. Because a new one will come along that's better or more appropriate or more. So I think we're kind of in that space at the moment. That's how it feels.
Yeah, you said before we started about it being sort of the Wild West at the moment, and I think it very much feels like that. The more I've sort of looked into sort of ESG, which I think we can probably come on to a bit now, so, I found that actually you start looking into it and you just think, well, actually there's so many people sort of doing the same thing but slightly differently, and I've started looking at it from a novice point of view, and I start thinking, well, actually it seems to me like lots of bits are being missed or whatever, and I think when you try to create something that's incredibly broad to cover multiple industries or whatever it may be, I think that it also becomes incredibly difficult to figure out exactly what you're going to quantify and how do you actually value some of those things. And another example, actually going back slightly, on sort of the sustainable product side, you were talking previously about, so there's recycled content, but then there's also secondary content, which is not recycled content, but it is a waste product that's being used in the process. Is that right? And I think that's a good example because that's something that is inherently making a product more sustainable, but it's not actually quantifiable.
I think it is quantifiable and it's recognised in in various methodologies as being better. But again, it's really important to separate them out and to recognise the difference. Recycled material is something that's been pre-used, that's then been reprocessed to do something else. A secondary material is just a byproduct of a different process. The two, so it's never been used before, so you can't claim it's
technically
recycled.
a virgin,
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a waste product.
Otherwise, it would have gone to landfill.
Yeah.
So it does have a value. It does have, it is recognised in EPD methodology, for example. And the benefits are there. But there's a sort of grey area in the explanation about that. And we see that in various comms that come out, and people claim recycled when they mean secondary. And it's important that people understand the difference, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that's where the EPD thing is incredibly valuable because it is demonstrating that as well. Whereas if you look at a company website, it's not actually on there, you can't necessarily see that. So that it's kind of a hidden element of sustainability, or perhaps it has been until now, whereas now it will start to be much clearer. And perhaps that should be a key thing on an EPD certificate that's very obvious. Because if you add that and the recycled content together, actually, you start going, oh, actually, yeah, it's actually really quite good.
It starts telling the story. It starts telling, and I think that's the position that we've always taken, is that as a responsible manufacturer, I genuinely believe we are. Right? I do. This isn't marketing veneer. I genuinely think we do the right things for the right reasons in the right way. We give our customers all the data that we can, all the information that we can, and leave it up to them to make the decision. We'll tell you what the carbon is. We'll tell you about talking about the ESG. We'll tell you about what the ethical risk of certain products might be. But ultimately, we have to leave that up to the customer. We can't make that decision. The issue is, we're asked and we'll say, well, what's better? Is this better than this? It's rarely that black and white. It depends which lens you look through. So are you looking through the carbon lens, the recycle lens, the human rights lens, the circularity lens?
It's where this standardisation needs to come in, like you're saying, it relies on the government doing something, which is improbable. But it's one of the challenges, isn't it? It's where we need sort of a level playing field where it's easy to see and quantify all of these things, whereas at the moment, it can vary so much. It can be just a complete nightmare to actually find this information out. And if that's the case, people just won't do it.
And the issue that all the peers in our sector have is that we all want to try to be the best. We're all sort of pushing ahead, but there should be a benchmark, a baseline that we should all have to at least achieve or report against. So we've always taken the position that we're not interested in getting commercial advantage from the sustainability work we do. We'll get the commercial advantage from the product range, the quality, the expertise that you get, the service that you get from working with an organisation of our scale. I think there should be just a baseline though of sort of what's a minimum standard of sort of sustainable performance, and everybody should be reporting in the same way. The issue is there are loads, and if I were to say this to 10 different people would come back and say, well, this is the standard you should use, or this is the baseline, or this is, and the reality is, because we're investigating all of them at the moment, we don't know which one to align ourselves to.
Absolutely, it's a really big challenge. I mean, we're looking at there's some things I'm doing that I can't really talk about at the moment, but one of the things we're looking at is ESG and how we actually use that to quantify what we're doing as a business, to demonstrate how sustainable we are. However, as you read through the documents, you realise there's so much stuff we're doing that's not there, or that could be quantified and isn't, or perhaps the view it takes is incorrect. And I don't know if you found this, but what we're noticing is some of the people that have written some of these documents are clearly sort of financial economist types, not engineers or whoever it may be that's actually delivering the solution on the ground. And because of that disconnect, it's creating an issue where as I say, it's not quantifiable, or the metrics are not suitable to actually monitor it correctly. So we're sort of looking at now going, well, actually, we're going to have to write our own to actually measure effectively how to do this. So I don't know if that's something you guys have kind of come across. I don't know if you want to give a bit of a summary of ESG so people know a bit more about what I'm talking about, because you probably know more about it than I do.
Well, I'm very focused on the environmental sustainability side of things, which is very much about what the products are made of, how they're made, and what they do. That's the sort of first thing that people think about when they think about a sustainability strategy. But we've already talked about balancing the social, the environmental, and the economic. We've always recognised that the S of ESG, the social element, is absolutely vital. You've got to put people at the heart of your sustainability strategy. Otherwise, what's the point? And I think that, to be really lofty about it, if you look back and go, well, all the environmental stuff isn't about saving the planet, it's about sustaining human life on the planet. And if you're going to protect human life, you've got to think about the people right at the start. So it's something, again, because we sort of recognised that early on, we've invested in it. I think we're the only business in the sector that I know of, certainly, who employs a full-time business and human rights person. And Elaine, my colleague, is at director level on that because it's at the core of what we do. And it's so just to give you sort of some of the examples of the works that we did, the work that we do. We import a lot of natural stone, and the team will go out and they will interrogate and they will explore the ethical risks of importing that stone. So we look at the human rights issues that might create issues. We monitor that. We look at it really closely. We interrogate it. We measure it against against all the best standards. We work with the United Nations Global Compact to understand how best to sort of work in those communities. And then we report that to our customers. We come up with various tools that help people to understand what the ethical risks are for different materials in different countries, in different territories, so that they can make decisions based on that. But that's always been our strategy, to share data, to be honest about the data, and let people make the decisions based on what we send back to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the challenge, isn't it? You can only the decisions still have to fall to individuals, so you just need to make sure they're as informed and engaged as much as possible, and you're taking them. The other thing is taking them on the journey with you. We talked earlier about sort of driveways. This is a product we haven't really talked about yet, but driveways, and then being used as using permeable paving to mitigate sort of flood risk and improve water quality and those kind of things. But then they end up being ripped out when people move in because they don't know about the product or what they do. So you can easily end up in a situation where you're embedding sustainability objectives and environmental credentials, but if people don't understand them, they can easily be removed when people come and move into a property, say, if they don't like the look of it.
It's absolutely about engagement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it has to be, we're in an interesting place because a lot of this will be driven by legislation or driven by sensible guidance. We'll provide the solutions and make it easy for people to install that. But there's this sort of the community piece that if you miss that, if you don't get people involved, it's not going to wash through. It's as you say, people will change these features. They won't adopt them. They won't embrace the features, and it won't. You're at risk then of all the good work that you planned in right at the start just gets undone because when people, you talked about light pollution. So if you design a scheme that's that's going to be, what's the phrase you used?
As a dark skies.
So if you use a scheme like that, and then as soon as the homeowners at the end move in, then the first thing they want to do is to, if it's not been explained to them why that's important, the first thing they want to do is put a load of lights on because they want.
Yeah, exactly. It's making sure those credentials and objectives are managed in perpetuity. So the dark sky example, dark sky is a regulation that's brought in by sort of national parks and places like that to make sure that nature and the unique characteristics of those places are maintained. You can look up and look at the stars while you're out in nature. But actually, those are things that should be carried through into developments everywhere. But as you say, when people move in, they might think, oh, it's a bit too dark here. Yeah. I want a floodlight on the front of the house. So how do you manage that? And you can't manage that unless you think what's going to happen when the human element is introduced. And that applies to a huge amount of different environmental targets and objectives. So I know people that are doing a lot of work on water. And what they're doing when it comes to water now is they're trying to remove the human element in terms of water management, because as soon as you have people able to take off a restrictor or whatever, they will. And actually, it needs to be sort of hidden away so you don't even know that these things are happening. So for example, there's new shower heads now that inject air into the water, and it reduces the quantity of water by about 60%, but the volume is the same because the water's kind of padded out by the air in it. So it feels like an even more luxurious shower, but with a fraction of the water. So it's making sure those things are embedded, and that works really well for hotels because they've got control. But when it comes to a home, someone could easily change the shower head because they want something that's a bit more interesting. So it's making sure you can find alternative ways to do that so it's applicable to the place that it's being done.
But isn't it also about explaining to people what those features do, because I think a lot of people, if they understand it and embrace it, and we see examples of this in my background's very much in sustainable drainage and SUDs, and there are examples of sustainable drainage features, swales, reed beds, attenuation ponds. If they're just plonked in the middle of a development and then the developer leaves and then people come back and go, well, that grass ditch is really annoying because it's getting in my way and I'd like to, so yeah, they'll go to great pains to try to sort of pave over it. But if people know what it's doing, and if you tell people all the benefits that it's bringing, not just in terms of water, but in terms of all the biodiversity and the air quality and all the rest, then people, there are examples where people sort of take pride in it and they maintain it and they look after it. So that, we always talk about maintenance being a big problem with spaces, but if you can encourage the community in which the features exist to kind of look after them, there are great examples where it does work. We're based in our head office is up in Elland on the end of the Calder Valley, and Incredible Edible in Todmorden was a great example of that. Sort of this guerrilla kind of team that would sort of go in and take over unused spaces and plant food in those spaces, and the community embraced it and they took it on, and now Incredible Edibles all over the world. It's it's a really nice movement. It's the ethos behind it and the benefits that it ultimately delivers are really positive, and that comes from a place of assuming that most people, I think it's true, most people want to do the right thing. Yeah, but you need to educate them and give them the tools to do it.
Yeah, that's it, and take them on the journey with you. If you can make them feel embedded in the process, then they're much more receptive to it, and people will take an ownership over what they've been involved with. Kids that have been involved in the development of a park or planting trees somewhere are much more likely to protect those trees, and they want to take their family and show them, so it sort of filters through, doesn't it?
There was a great example of that sort of engagement with a retrofit SUDS project that we worked on with some brilliant people, with the BITC sort of ran the project. And the output was to find out whether retrofit SUDS was cost effective. So we went to a school in South Manchester and we did a load of sort of SUDS interventions, which meant that they could disconnect from the water mains for their discharge. So they didn't have to pay discharge rates. They were relatively inexpensive, so the payback was a relatively short period of time. But the conversations with the teachers there were going, it wasn't about the money; it was about all the benefits that it brought them. It was a fairly unique education space, I suppose. But the fact that when it rained, the kids would go outside and they'd see the water flowing from one catchment to the next, and then they'd learn about the water cycle, and frog spawn would be in there, and then all the biodiversity they attract. It's the multiple benefits that you get from including these features in a space are, not priceless. But they're incredibly valuable. And by explaining to people what they're doing and by bringing them with you, that's how you get the most out of it.
It is, but it's also how you then sell that process and the values behind it to sort of other people to embed in other projects. So, for example, with SUDS, it's about thinking, the target is to deal with water, but actually you've then got the community elements, you've then got biodiversity and everything else that you want to bring with it as well. So I've seen lots of projects with SUDS, some where I've seen SUDS, really nice idea. SUDS are in the middle of a series of houses, so they sort of form the green out the front. But what they've done is essentially created a canyon in the middle of the housing development. So it was actually a nightmare to get to the person that lived opposite's house, or kids couldn't really play there because you couldn't kick a ball because it would just go straight into this valley they created in the middle. And also you end up in the other side of things where they're on the very periphery of the site in sort of an area that's kind of completely left and neglected. And it's sort of going, right, okay, well, how do we rethink how these things work to add the most value? Can we use them to form the spine of the development, weave their way through? So, okay, that's taking the water throughout the development. You're then bringing biodiversity and greenery into the new settlement as well. But then also they become the routes that people move. So people are now engaging with biodiversity and these features. So, and perhaps you can incorporate play alongside it as well. So you're creating a really multifunctional response to deal with a multitude of issues, which also benefits the developer because then they don't have to have lots of areas zoned for individual uses. They can go, right, this is the core solution, which factors in lots of these considerations we need to have.
And the developer will be able to charge more for those houses because people like seeing water out their windows. They like green space. It's one of those things that tacitly is understood. And I'm sure I've seen a study somewhere that puts a financial value on it, but I haven't been able to find it recently, so I won't quote a number. But it comes back to thinking about these things right at the very start and sort of designing them in. So it's from a designer's point of view, I think it's understanding all the issues that you've got, and it comes back to something that you said earlier. It's like you shouldn't start with the development and going, right, well, we're going to put these houses here, and how are we going to fit everything around it? You basically build all the water features, the biodiversity, the infrastructure. Put that in, and then put your dwellings around that in order to create this space that's functional, that's attractive, that's workable and practical.
Yeah.
And the challenge for us as a manufacturer, because we're not designers and we're not developers, but the challenge for us is to come up with the products and the systems that make it easy for designers to incorporate those systems. And that's the real sort of exciting opportunity for us in the what it does piece of the sustainable product journey. It's understanding what the problems are, because we all know that putting trees in an urban space is good, and we all accept that. I think the argument's been won that putting green space in urban developments brings all the air quality, water management, amenity, all the multiple benefits that you'll get from this kind of space. But it's not easy, is it? And the hard landscaping part, we've been involved in that for a long time. We're the experts in that. And then we've got landscape architects who are arboriculturalists who are brilliant at doing the green stuff. But we need to manage the transition points. And it's the transition between that hard and soft landscaping that traditionally has been very difficult to design or fiddly to design and then tricky to install. So that's very much where our focus area is as a business. We're really engaged with that, and a lot of the ideas are really quite simple. A lot of the concepts are really quite simple. A lot of the things that people are asking us for are not complicated to do, but it's just understanding what the problems are and then bringing those to the table. So I'm really excited. Again, ideas that we've had for a long time, that we've been kicking around and we've been talking about, but now there's real appetite, both internally from us as a business and externally from customers. There's a real appetite to sort of solve these problems and to create the kind of spaces that that people are going to want to live and work and play in, and that are going to be resilient to the onset of climate change. Because we talked a lot about sort of mitigation, about the carbon issue, about reducing our harm on the environment, but climate change is happening. We've seen examples of that in terms of extreme heat earlier on this year, in terms of all the flooding that goes on. Because it's happening, we need to create spaces that are resilient to these kind of.
But it goes back to something we were going to talk about, sort of mitigation and adaptation, and sort of the difference between those two things.
I think it's important to understand. This is a model that we adopted, and it's not unique to us by any means, but it just really helps to understand what it really helps to sort of think about your sustainability strategy in those two strands. Are you looking to mitigate your harm on the environment? From our point of view, that's driving carbon out of our operations, driving carbon out of our materials, and reporting those reductions as clearly and as openly as possible. But then adaptation is the acceptance that the human race didn't do what it needed to do 20, 30, 40 years ago, and that climate change is happening. It's increasing faster. All the numbers sort of are demonstrating that's happening. And even if you don't believe the numbers, if you've got a window, you can see it's raining. You felt it was incredibly hot earlier on in the year. Those things are coming coming at us. Those things are coming down the pipes hard and fast, and
Yeah.
we need to be shored up. We need to design new spaces so they're resilient to them, and we need to adapt existing spaces to cope with those demands.
Absolutely. I mean, I try and, it's going to sound really bad, but I try and take a view of that we can kind of ignore climate change in a way, because a lot of the issues we have are there irrespective of climate change. It's just going to make them all worse. So we know we have to do a lot more in terms of making communities more cohesive. We need to take people with us on the journey. We know that there's we were talking again in the break about energy and how we know that actually the UK is facing a huge energy issue in transmission of energy, not just in terms of production of energy, which means things are going to have to go off grid. There's going to have to be more local energy production, all of these kind of things. That's irrespective of climate change. That's going to have to happen because our grid doesn't function as well as it should do. So a lot of these realities are there, like the water issues we've got. They're just all going to be exacerbated, be that in terms of trying to meet these carbon objectives or to be just generally more sustainable, to adapt. So they kind of all need to be there to tackle these things anyway. It's just, and that's where the mitigation and adaptation comes in, because for me, it's you're mitigating a current issue, but with a view that we know that it's going to also get worse. So it's trying to resolve problems we've already got, but with the provision and the capacity to deal with the future issues that will come, which is why I think a lot of people, we're meeting less and less of them as it's becoming more unbelievably obvious that we're facing these big climate issues, are sort of against it. And you sort of go, well, forget about that, because we've got all these other problems that need the same solution anyway. This is just a multiplier of the issue. And that's to me, that's the very, very crux of it, which is why infrastructure has to become such an important strategy. And we have to change this view of lovely, fluffy landscape. It's infrastructure. It's part of the infrastructure of society and biodiversity that goes alongside the water, so the blue infrastructure, and the grey infrastructure, which is all the hard surfaces in the buildings. So actually, green, blue, grey, that is the strategy that has to sort of drive everything, which resolves all of that, and then we figure out where properties and things go after.
And I think you're absolutely right. What's the worst that can happen if we adopt that strategy?
Yeah.
If you could talk to people who don't believe in climate change, right? But you can describe to them a landscape or a development that includes beautiful green spaces, that manages water through it really nicely, that provides all the biodiversity options, that provide cohesive communities. Why wouldn't you you're right. Why wouldn't we do that anyway?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really classic meme of it where there's someone talking about climate change and the issues and all this kind of thing, and then someone in the audience going, but why are we doing this? It's going to cost thousands, blah, 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 and what if it's not real? And then there's someone at the back going, yeah, but we might just make the world a better place. Like, it kind of is irrelevant in a way.
It's really hard when you talk about this not to sound like some evangelical kind
it's
of...
true, yeah.
But the truth is, that's what we're all engaged in. Anybody in the sort of, in the infrastructure, it's about making things that are robust, practical, manageable, livable. But why wouldn't you make it as beautiful
and viable? I think.
Yeah.
Because just to go back to the economic side, like, you have to make sure these things are viable, but it's changing the way economically we account for things. So, for example, if we do a development that, okay, yes, that development might make you a load of money, but actually, if that's having a significant detriment to the water supply, or the cost of living there for bills and everything is astronomical, is it actually economically viable? And actually, we need to look at those impacts it has, because we know that those things incrementally across many developments have a very big cumulative impact, and they need to be accommodated for within each project. So it's kind of making sure those things are embedded all the way through. And actually, economics isn't just, the funds coming in to build something and the cash coming out after you sell it. Obviously that is it, but you need to accommodate those things within that process to see if it is actually viable. Because taking the shortcut, yes, you might make more money, but actually in the long term, it becomes much less viable for people that are actually going to inhabit that or purchase it or whatever.
And you can't ignore the financial sort of responsibility that you've got to create sustainable businesses that keep up with people employed and keep sort of taxes sort of flowing around communities. But you're right, you can't just focus on the financial profit. Again, if you just look at the economic thing and ignore the environmental and the social, then that's not going to work. We can see examples of where it isn't working. So it all comes back to those tenets, doesn't it? Pulling things together and making sure they work in conjunction.
A quick message from our sponsors. As a big brand manufacturer leading discussions across all aspects of ESG, this episode is a perfect fit for our sponsor Marshalls, as not only are some of their team in it, but they're also sponsoring it too. As well as investing in renewable energy and water recycling across their manufacturing network, the firm was also exploring a range of eco-technologies to pave the way for even lower product carbon impacts in the future. Read more about their latest work on product carbon labelling in the link in the episode description below.
So in terms of the future, what type of things are you guys looking at in terms of sustainability in the environment as a company to do? Because there's so many things we've already talked about that are being done, but from your perspective, what more could you do, or what are you looking to do? And what challenges are there that are stopping you from potentially doing some of those things?
Well, stripping it back then to the how it's made, what it's made of, and what it does. How it's made operationally, we've got all our targets to try and reduce our emissions as much as we possibly can. For example, well, actually, an interesting little anecdote about our sort of or an interesting anecdote to talk about our sort of carbon reduction journey. We started out on a project quite a few years ago now to install solar on all of our manufacturing works. But shortly afterwards, we switched to a green energy tariff. We invested in that. It cost us money, but it was the right thing to do, and it helped us to hit our net zero targets. So the question cropped up immediately afterwards, well, if we're on a green energy tariff, why are we bothering putting solar up? Because you can't double count it. When we ran the maths, and obviously with energy prices going up, we suddenly realised that putting solar on builds financial resilience into the company, and it means that we can use the funds that that generates or that protects to invest in greener technologies, into more efficient processes that are further going to clean our operations up. So what started out as a climate mitigation exercise has ended up being a sort of a resilience and adaptation exercise. So we're looking across our operations to drive carbon out of our operations even more. In terms of what things are made out of and how things are made, the projects that we've got on with are really exciting. It's really cutting edge stuff, and because of the scale that we operate on, the opportunities that it presents to make carbon savings are immense. So that's a lot of the carbon sequestration work that I was talking about earlier. We're applying for massive European sort of funding projects to support our endeavours in that area. We're working with people, with peers in our sector, probably more than we ever have. And it's a cliche when people talk about collaboration being important, because it's a nice thing to talk about. But I'm seeing more of it than we ever have before. We're working with our suppliers, we're working with with our competitors as well to a degree, to understand and to share best practice. So we're looking at new materials. I've talked about the cement-free blocks that we've already produced. We're looking at different, the sequestration work that we're looking at. But in terms of what it does, absolutely, green infrastructure is at the heart of our NPD now. Trying to come up with ways to simply and easily create sort of green spaces that are going to thrive and going to last is right at the top of our new product development agenda at the moment. So it's really exciting times.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. So is that things like sort of new types of permeable solutions, things to support sort of vegetation, like trees, for example, and tree roots and stuff in sort of existing landscapes? What type of sort of green infrastructure products are you looking to sort of?
Things that are tree pits, absolutely. Things that support the growth of trees. things that systems and products that support the inclusion of rain gardens, ways of managing water across spaces to make the inclusion of sustainable drainage systems easier and more off the shelf. Because there are great examples of brilliant SUDS designers who are conjuring up these brilliant bespoke designs, but we've got the reach and the scope and the scale to make those kind of features mass market. So it's I mentioned earlier, a lot of it is around the interventions, the interface between soft landscaping and hard landscaping. We continue. I mean, we've been selling permeable paving for more than 20 years. It's really successful. It's a great example of a product that is a hybrid between something that's practical, pragmatic, looks good, but it also slows the flow of water in a catchment. It provides water cleansing benefits. It provides a controlled flow of clean water. I don't know that we need to develop that anymore because it's a really well functioning.
Yeah, I mean,
product.
we use it as our default on all of our projects now.
As
pretty
well
much.
you should. Yeah, I'm pleased to hear it. Yeah, I mean, we have conversations. We've had conversations in the past. Why shouldn't all paving be permeable? Why shouldn't all block paving be permeable? Because even if it can't infiltrate, it's still you're still getting the water. The water quality benefits, you're still controlling the flow of the water, and you're still ultimately creating a puddle-free, safe surface for people to use. But we recognise that although that's a really useful component in your water management portfolio, it doesn't provide the air quality, the biodiversity, the amenity benefits that soft suds do. So that's the missing piece for us. We've got a really good understanding of the water management chain, with the sort of hard solutions, we've kind of got that covered. It's more about that space is more about educating people how to link them up, what order to consider those different techniques, those different systems in.
Yeah. So it's more turning to sort of like a facilitation kind of role and helping facilitate that transition to that type of design, basically.
Yeah, because we always say it's about, and as a SUDS purist, I always encourage, we always encourage people to manage water on the surface as much as possible and to cram in as much as green infrastructure as you can. But we've got to accept that in the sort of tight urban landscapes that we're frequently designing, and sometimes you're going to have to put water under the ground. Sometimes you're going to need to use underground tanks and pipes. But it's making sure that people don't automatically default to that straight away. Go through the hierarchy of options first, and you might well end up there. Good SUDS practice recognises that no one solution's the right way forward. But I mean, we're constantly trialling different types of permeable surfaces. We have done for years, and honestly, concrete block paving keeps coming back as being one of the most straightforward, easy to install, relatively inexpensive. Certainly, if you think about all the benefits it brings in terms of, I won't repeat the multiple benefits again, but in terms of all the benefits it brings, you're getting an awful lot for not a lot of money. The problem is less about, and that's an example where the solution is there, but I still talk to people who are terrified of using it because they think it's new technology because it's only been around for a quarter of a century.
Yeah, that's it. As we said many times, it's about taking people sort of with you and educating people as well, isn't it? And that's part of the role with sustainability. It's not just doing your thing in a little silo. It's thinking about how you collaborate and take people with you. So what other things are you kind of involved with operationally as a company? Is there, because there's I'm jumbling my words here. I know there's some big suppliers that are moving to sort of electric vehicles. I know there's one which has moved to electric haulage, not in the UK, but abroad. And they're looking at a lot of those kind of other operational things that they do to try and make them as sustainable as possible.
Transport's the big issue that we have, that we can't solve yet. We're working with suppliers. We're working with we're working with experts in that area to understand what we can do. But we with the amount of we move a lot of heavy stuff around, and we move it long distances, and it has to be reliable, and it has to be relatively inexpensive. The technology isn't there yet for that, so we're poised and ready to exploit it when it becomes available. Because that's it, cement's one of the big issues for us. Transport's the other big issue. We can solve the cement one. We're working on that. Transport, to be quite honest, is it feels like it'll be a while before we're using a full electric fleet or hydrogen fleet or some cleaner form of transport. In the meantime, though, our company car policy is, we now offer. I'm looking at my colleagues with electric cars. They're every time people change, they're changing onto electric cars because that's a great way of cutting our emissions. So I've run out of steam there talking operationally. It's hard.
It is difficult.
Cut that bit out though, Rob.
No, it is very difficult when you think sort of operationally about how to reduce your emissions, because some of the things are not that straightforward. We, for example, our practice, we try to be as paper-free as we can. However, sometimes when we're doing designs or markups, you need to do it on paper. It doesn't feel as good doing it digitally. And it's thinking, right, okay, well, actually, what's the time difference in us doing this? So what's the efficiency, where's the cost, all this kind of thing as well. So we do still do some markup, not very often, but we do still do some markups on paper, so we're not completely paperless, because we think it's a little bit impractical for what we need. So there are always challenges. One thing I've been talking about recently with some organizations is in terms of their sort of corporate responsibility in terms of expenses that are carried out by the business. So for example, if you're hosting an event and you're feeding people, should you be pushing for something to be vegan or vegetarian? And I've had some conversations with some organizations where people have said, well, we're not going to force people to go vegan. And you're sort of saying, well, that's not exactly the point. The point is, as a business, you are making a decision to try and reduce your impact. But you can also go further than that and be smart about the message, which is where you want to take people with you and say, okay, well, it's going to be predominantly, or the default, vegetarian and vegan. But if people want, they can opt in for meat. And if there is meat, it's going to be from a farm that's involved in regenerative agriculture or rewilding, or the meat is coming from a conservation process or culling or something like that, where actually it's from something that supports the sustainable management of our landscape and environment. And that way you're pushing people to a more sustainable option in the first place. And if they do want to opt in, they're getting something that is supporting these processes. So I like to use that as an example, because it's quite a good way of thinking about being more sustainable, but also educating people on an important topic, that actually we should eat less meat, but if we are going to eat it, this is the type of place it has to come from. And then supporting that as sort of a business. And we're looking now at how do you embed that in expenses. So for example, if I go out for a meal while I'm away with work and I go to Nando's, should I be able to claim that chicken on my expenses? I don't know Nando's policy, I haven't looked at it, but that's an example where you start thinking, actually, should we be supporting that as a business for sustainability wise? So there's those kind of things as well that are starting to sort of like creep in terms of sort of corporate responsibility.
I think that's an interesting one, and one that we haven't, to my knowledge, sort of put into place yet. But there is a responsibility in how you, and I know there are individuals within my organisation who will always look for the independents and the local people when they're eating, they'll shun the chains out of choice. So maybe that's something that we could drive into policy, and it's about thinking about it all the way through, isn't it? And even the little change. I think, but culturally, we've still got work to do to embed it with. There's 2,500. We're a big organisation. There's 2,500 people that work here, and it's constantly talking to people about making them consider the choices that they make individually, and how that can have a big impact on on what we do as a business. But that's that's an interesting point, and one that I'll take back to the office.
Yeah, because it's about corporate responsibility, not individual responsibility, if you know what I mean. They can do whatever they want as individuals, but the company are not necessarily going to support that or whatever.
I heard that with we use one-click LCA as the EPD, the EPD software that we use. They're excellent, an excellent organisation, and they seem to be the market leader. But that's exactly what happened when when one of our colleagues was taken out for dinner to following a conference, and they made a very clear stance, and they said, well, it's going to be vegetarian, and if you want meat, you can pay for it yourself.
Yeah,
and I think that's that's a kind of an example of walking the walk, isn't it? And I think that's the kind of I'm fully supportive of that. So I'll take that back to the office, Niall, and I'll talk to that. I do know that the procurement teams, we got the procurement on team with we got the procurement team on board with this agenda some time ago. So it's something that they interrogate our suppliers and our partners about on a regular basis. The suppliers and partners have much the same issue that we do, in that it's very difficult to come up with standard methods and standard models of what to report and how to report it. But because they're being asked the question, because it's on the agenda, we can be confident that our supply chain is being responsible. Yeah, that's absolutely core to our principles.
No, I think that's so important, and that's why I like to raise this idea of kind of the food side of things, because it's not, you can ignore the factors about food, because it's that kind of strategy and principle going, if we think about it this way, we're doing something sustainable, but we're also teaching people about, that actually, if you are going to eat these things or do things that are less sustainable, think about like how to find solutions that are beneficial, that work in different ways. So it's not just going, it's basically the carbon argument. Let's not just look at carbon, and let's not just look at it as meat being bad. Let's look at it and go, right, how can we use that as a tool to educate people and also potentially save emissions or whatever else as well. So it's interesting to get people's opinions on that, because it's a different way of kind of looking at some of these problems. And I think this is what I've liked about this conversation, is that it's not a linear. This is the same with everything. There's no one answer. There's a lot of different options and ways to look at a problem, and there's no necessarily right way to do it. It's kind of finding your way, and people adapting and looking at it in different ways and coming up with different solutions is part of resolving the challenge that we all face.
And I always think it helps to pull it back to your own household, the way you live your life, and then think, well, am I living the values that I would like our organisation to do? And you're absolutely right. We mentioned earlier, we say it feels like the Wild West at the moment, but that's better than it was 6 years. It was no West 6 years ago. That's the line we like to use. We've gone from no West to the Wild West, and there will be more sort of consistency and standardisation in years to come. But in the meantime, there's loads of stuff that we can do, and I think it's also important to accept that we're going to get it wrong sometimes. And if when you're pushing the boundaries and when you're trying things that are new, sometimes you're going to back the wrong horse, and sometimes you're going to get things wrong. But that's how we're going to learn. And it's I think what's difficult for us as a business is having the confidence to sort of say when we've got things wrong.
But it's one of the most important bits.
We get more right than we get wrong, but I think sharing the things that you got wrong is how people learn.
Yeah, and exactly, and people can learn from your mistakes as much as you can learn from them.
And this is where that collaboration thing's coming together. It's like this is how we're going to drive things forward in a healthier way. And I'm really encouraged by that kind of cross-fertilization of best practice.
No, I think that's absolutely the way to look at it. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been really interesting to find out about and understand a bit more of kind of the challenges and what's sort of going on. But I think we'll probably stop there because we've covered so much. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really fascinating. And I look to speak to you in the future and find out what else you guys have got going on.
Well, thanks for having me. And as I keep saying, it's a fast-moving space. So in a year's time, I'm sure I'll be coming with all sorts of new things as well. But thanks for having me.
That's right. No, that's brilliant. And we look forward to it. Cheers.
Sorry to interrupt, but this episode is sponsored by Water Offsets. If you are working on projects where you might need environmental credits, then they are the people to go to. They specialise in not only biodiversity net gain credits, but also water neutrality and nutrient neutrality too. So if you have an estate, a farm, or some other kind of landowner, or interested in that kind of project, then they could really help you find, new ways of funding those projects and diversifying your land and farms to take you through the whole process. And if you're a developer who's run into problems, then actually they can help provide those credits that you need to unlock your land and get your development done. So check out Water Offsets if you need help with any of those things. Many thanks.